"Is that really all you've got, old man?" The words sliced through the dry heat of the training yard, bouncing off the concrete walls and echoing across the bleachers where a handful of cadets lingered, eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. The sun glinted harshly off their polished rifles, aimed casually but with intent at the figure who had calmly stepped into their midst. Frank Thompson, 84 years old, dainty hands folded in front of him, eyes a piercing blue that seemed to see straight through the bravado of youth, did not flinch. The wind rattled a loose panel on the bleacher railing, carrying the dry scent of dust and sweat. Yet Frank remained still, a solitary island of calm against the storm of adolescent arrogance. Cadet Connor Blake, barely 20, leaned forward, forcing a smile that betrayed his nervousness more than confidence, while Liam Harris, equally inexperienced, mirrored the pose, rifles raised, their uniforms crisp and clean, untarnished by the heat or sweat, their shadows long and sharp on the concrete below. Frank's gaze shifted slowly to the metal pinned crookedly to his jacket lapel, tarnished by time, edges dulled, yet the sunlight caught it in a fleeting flash that seemed to hum with memories. He inhaled, the air thick with tension, and exhaled just enough to move the collar of his jacket, a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate. The metal, worn from decades of service and battles far from this quiet training yard, acted as a key, unlocking the past hidden beneath the layers of calm. The yard melted away, replaced by the humming heat of an Afghan valley, the distant sound of machinery replaced by the rustle of desert wind, and the faint echo of commands in a language both foreign and familiar. Frank's mind traveled back to the day he had guided a team through a precise maneuver, every step calculated, every glance accounted for, every heartbeat synchronized with the next. He remembered the patch of sun-bleached earth where he had stood, a young Marine surrounded by chaos, yet utterly in control, each decision measured, each action decisive. A fleeting hand on his shoulder, a nod, a whispered word of acknowledgement, all preserved in the muscle memory and the weight of his presence. The vision dissolved, replaced instantly by the bright, unforgiving glare of the cadet's eyes. Ethan Ross, standing a few paces back, sensed the shift immediately, the almost imperceptible change in posture, the depth in Frank's eyes, the quiet authority radiating from a man who had seen far more than any of them could imagine. Connor's fingers tightened slightly on the rifle, Liam's jaw stiffened, and for the first time, the confident veneer cracked. The air felt heavier, each breath a reminder that the rules they thought they controlled were now being challenged silently. Frank lifted a single hand, the movement slow and purposeful, brushing against the leather strap of his worn satchel, a relic of a career spent mastering skills that transcended technology or youth. He did not raise his voice, did not threaten, did not demand. He simply existed, a presence that spoke louder than any command or threat, and the cadets felt it instantly, a weight pressing against their certainty, a truth undeniable. The distant whistle of a training drill continued, oblivious to the small theater of tension unfolding at its center, yet every fiber of the three young men's bodies registered the shift. Frank's eyes, steady and unwavering, met theirs, and in that silence, a story as old as Valor itself was told. The medals, the scars, the quiet moments of decision in the face of impossible odds, all radiated through him, an invisible yet palpable force. No one spoke. The rifles, once pointed with casual arrogance, wavered slightly. The sun continued to climb, baking the concrete beneath their boots, but the only movement was in the eyes of the cadets, registering respect and a dawning understanding that some lessons cannot be taught, only witnessed. Frank adjusted the worn metal once more, a subtle tilt, a private acknowledgement of a life fully lived and a history that demanded recognition not through words but through presence. The cadets' breaths caught, each inhale loud in the sudden hush, and for a single, suspended heartbeat, the entire yard seemed to pause, as if the wind itself waited, the echoes of the past reverberating against the present. In that frozen instant, they understood without a word spoken, the quiet power of a veteran whose experience and integrity eclipsed their youthful bravado, a lesson etched not on paper or through shouting, but in the measured silence of a man who had never needed to prove anything to anyone but himself. The heat of the afternoon pressed down on the training yard, the concrete shimmering faintly under the relentless sun, and the cadets, still frozen in the echo of the previous moment, began to shift uneasily, their confidence tempered by an unspoken awareness that something far greater than their years and training had entered their midst. Frank Thompson, standing with a posture that was at once relaxed and unyielding, allowed his gaze to drift across the expanse of the yard, taking in every detail, the angles of the bleachers, the slight wobble in the rifles, the cadence of breaths, the tension that hung thick between sun and shadow. The wind lifted a loose paper from the corner of the bleachers, sending it skittering across the asphalt, and Frank did not flinch, did not reach for it. But in his eyes was the precision of someone who had spent decades reading situations that required absolute clarity and calm. Ethan Ross, the younger cadet who had been standing slightly apart, took a hesitant step forward, sensing both the authority and the restraint in Frank's presence, and in that movement, the air seemed to tighten, every other sound dimming, the rustle of uniforms and the distant hum of the base machinery fading into a background murmur. Frank's hand brushed lightly against the worn leather strap of his satchel, the touch deliberate, almost ceremonial, and the cadets noticed, the subtle gesture speaking volumes, a story older and far more substantial than any boast or warning. In a quiet, deliberate motion, Frank lifted his chin, his eyes locking with Connor Blake and Liam Harris. And in that gaze, there was no threat, no need for words, yet it communicated an understanding that spanned decades of service and discipline, a history etched into posture, expression, and presence. The yard, still bright and glaring, seemed to contract around them, concentrating the moment into a crystal of suspense where the past and present collided. Memories surfaced unbidden, not in full scenes, but in flashes. A morning in the foothills with a team moving in unison, careful steps on gravel, subtle hand signals conveying absolute clarity, the quiet satisfaction of a task completed efficiently, the nod of acknowledgement from a peer who knew the weight of responsibility and the cost of failure, the meticulous adjustments of gear, the care taken to preserve tools and equipment, every action intentional, measured, and exact. The cadets' hands twitched slightly on their rifles, the earlier sense of control slipping like sand through their fingers, replaced by curiosity, awe, and an instinctive recognition of the skill and composure before them. Frank exhaled slowly, the motion gentle, a quiet counterpoint to the intensity in the cadet's stance, and the sunlight caught the subtle creases on his weathered jacket, the faded thread of a uniform that had seen countless missions, a lifetime of discipline embedded in the very fabric. Ethan Ross, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained silent, eyes wide, witnessing not just a man, but a legacy of expertise and unspoken leadership, the cadets' energy now tempered by the weight of history that surrounded them. The distant flag flapped lazily in the wind, the metal gongs on nearby equipment ringing faintly, and Frank shifted his weight, each movement controlled, deliberate, the rhythm of a veteran who had navigated chaos countless times without fanfare. The air held a taut stillness, the cadets' breaths measured, their pulse subtly rising, each second stretching, drawing out the moment of understanding. No word was necessary. The veteran's presence, his history, and the visible reminders of service, the medal, the satchel, the way he carried himself, conveyed a lesson more profound than any lecture could impart. Connor's eyes met Liam's, both registering the unspoken, a recognition dawning that respect could not be commanded through position alone, and in that instant, the cadence of authority shifted, the yard itself feeling smaller, more focused, as if the day had compressed to the space between them and Frank Thompson. The veteran's gaze softened ever so slightly, just enough to acknowledge the impression made, yet remained firm, unwavering, and the cadets, for the first time in their brief military careers, understood the quiet weight of experience, the potency of restraint, and the enduring significance of a presence earned over a lifetime. A subtle shift occurred in the air, almost imperceptible at first, as Frank Thompson adjusted his stance, the worn leather of his satchel creaking softly under the motion, and the cadets felt it immediately, a tension threading through their muscles, as if the invisible weight of decades pressed down on their shoulders. The sunlight danced across the concrete in shifting patterns, casting fleeting shadows that moved like silent spectators, and Frank's pale blue eyes scanned the yard with deliberate care, noting every posture, every microexpression, the slight tremor in a finger, the tightening of a jaw, all details that would have escaped a less seasoned observer. Connor Blake and Liam Harris exchanged glances, the confidence that had earlier propelled them forward now tempered by uncertainty, the air between them charged with a nervous awareness that the lesson unfolding was larger than the moment itself. Frank's hand brushed again against the metal pin to his jacket, the tarnished surface catching a flash of sun that seemed to hum with history. And as his fingers lingered on the edge, the yard around them dissolved into memory, transporting him to a morning in the arid hills where a team moved in precise formation, each step coordinated, each glance communicating volumes without a word, the rhythm of motion as familiar as breathing. The smell of dried dust, the subtle scrape of boots on gravel, the faint metallic tang in the air, all converged in his mind, a tapestry of experience that the cadets could not yet grasp, yet somehow felt pressing against them, a quiet authority that demanded recognition. Ethan Ross, positioned just behind the front line, shifted slightly, his own senses attuned to the change, and he could feel the energy in the yard bending toward Frank, the space compressing, the sunlight seeming hotter, sharper, as if the environment itself conspired to heighten the cadet's awareness. Frank took a measured step, slow and intentional, his movements fluid, economical, each motion calibrated. And in that step, the history of countless maneuvers, trainings, and careful decisions became tangible, a silent lecture in presence and precision. The cadets' rifles wavered subtly, the earlier posture of dominance undermined by the sheer, unspoken depth radiating from Frank, and their breath quickened, unnoticed in the sweep of observation and focus emanating from him. A small detail, a frayed edge of his jacket or the scuff on the toe of his worn boot, seemed to amplify the moment, hints of countless campaigns and quiet heroism that required no explanation, no embellishment, yet spoke louder than any shout could. Frank's gaze met Connor's directly, unwavering, calm yet commanding, and the words unspoken between them carried the full weight of understanding that some lessons were imparted not through commands, not through threats, but through the undeniable authority of experience. The wind lifted slightly, rustling the loose papers on the bleachers, carrying the faint scent of dust and warmth of the afternoon sun, yet Frank remained composed, the eye of the storm, his presence a tether for the tension vibrating through the cadets' limbs. They shifted in place, hesitant, aware that the old man before them embodied not only skill and discipline, but the legacy of decades where choices were precise, actions deliberate, and respect earned in the quietest, most enduring ways. A subtle exhale from Frank, almost imperceptible, signaled neither surrender nor challenge, only presence, yet it resonated fully with the cadets, each inhalation and heartbeat stretched by realization, the enormity of experience settling into their consciousness. Ethan Ross remained rooted, eyes wide, witnessing the tableau, understanding that this was more than a demonstration. It was a living lesson in restraint, authority, and the understated power of a veteran whose life had been devoted to mastery of both self and situation. The sunlight glinted off the metal once more, a quiet reminder that time and service etched an indelible authority into a person, one that required no proclamation, no shout, no gesture beyond the simple, deliberate act of being, and the cadets, for the first time in the intensity of the afternoon, felt the truth of it deep in their bones. A respect forged in silence, heavy and undeniable, anchoring the moment with a gravity that would linger far beyond the heat of the day. The air in the training yard shifted subtly as Frank Thompson moved a step to the side, his posture unchanging yet radiating authority, the sunlight glinting off the edge of his worn metal and catching the faint lines etched into his jacket by decades of use. Each crease a story, each scuff a memory of precision and discipline. Connor Blake and Liam Harris adjusted their grips on their rifles instinctively, the earlier certainty now replaced by a measured caution, their breath shallow, the heat pressing down on the concrete seemingly heavier, more deliberate, as if the yard itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Frank's eyes, steady and clear, swept over them with a subtle intensity, noting the micro-expressions, the shift of weight in boots, the cadence of quickened breaths, and in that silent appraisal, the young cadets felt the weight of experience far beyond their own. Ethan Ross, standing slightly behind, observed with wide eyes, the realization growing that the presence before him was not only a veteran but a master of judgment, timing, and subtle command, someone who could convey authority and respect without a word. The wind stirred loose papers along the bleachers, carrying the scent of sun-baked dust and faint traces of the training yard, and Frank's hand moved slowly to adjust the strap of his satchel, a gesture deliberate, almost ceremonial, echoing a lifetime of routines honed to precision. In the brief flicker of sunlight reflecting off the metal, memories cascaded back. The early morning haze over a distant base, the rhythm of careful movements across uneven terrain, the quiet coordination of team members, each signal and adjustment precise, unspoken, necessary, and perfectly executed. The cadets' shoulders tensed and relaxed in small increments, their confidence ebbing, replaced by attentiveness, the awareness that the lesson unfolding was not in the words spoken but in the presence, in the deliberate actions, in the calm certainty of someone who had navigated challenges far beyond their imagining. Frank shifted again, his eyes narrowing subtly as if tracking invisible lines in the yard, the sun casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to stretch toward the cadets, wrapping the space in a web of attention and scrutiny. Every small movement, the tilt of his head, the slight shift of weight, the careful adjustment of jacket, spoke volumes about the discipline, judgment, and quiet authority accumulated over decades, and the cadets felt each nuance pressing against them, demanding acknowledgement. The heat of the afternoon pressed on their necks and shoulders, yet the only sensation they registered fully was the presence of Frank, steady, unyielding, an anchor in the center of the yard. Ethan Ross took a breath, steadying himself, noting the subtle indications of mastery in Frank's posture, the deliberate restraint, the careful observation, and in that instant, a deep understanding crystallized. That experience, when combined with patience and awareness, carried more weight than any youthful bravado or technical advantage. Connor and Liam exchanged brief glances, a silent communication passing between them, recognition of a truth that words could not convey, the quiet authority of Frank Thompson dominating not by force but by sheer, undeniable presence. The distant sound of a flag flapping in the wind, the faint hum of the base machinery, all faded into the background, leaving the yard, the cadets, and Frank in a suspended moment of comprehension. Every eye was drawn to the veteran, every thought bent toward understanding the unspoken lesson, the subtleties of posture, movement, and timing that communicated mastery beyond speech. Frank's gaze softened just enough to acknowledge their awareness, yet remained firm, unbroken, the cadets' breaths caught in synchronized rhythm with the silent cadence of respect, the lesson lingering in the air, tangible and inescapable, an imprint that would remain long after the sun had moved across the yard and the shadows had shifted. The tension in the training yard held, thick and almost tangible, as Frank Thompson shifted his weight ever so slightly, the subtle movement of his shoulders and the glint of the worn metal reflecting the sun's sharp rays conveying authority without a single word. Connor Blake and Liam Harris exchanged another brief glance, their posture still rigid, rifles lowered a fraction as the realization of the veteran's presence settled deeper into their consciousness. Frank's eyes swept the yard, noting the patterns of movement, the micro-adjustments of boots on concrete, the faint tremor in a cadet's fingers, the uneven breathing of those who had assumed control would come from force alone. A loose sheet of paper scuttled across the yard, caught in a playful eddy of wind, and Frank's hand rose in the slowest, most deliberate motion, brushing it aside, each gesture precise, measured, and meaningful, communicating lessons of patience, awareness, and timing. Ethan Ross, standing a few steps back, observed the interactions with widening eyes, sensing that every small motion from Frank carried the weight of decades of disciplined training, strategic thinking, and leadership refined under pressure far greater than the sunbaked yard could offer. The afternoon heat pressed on the backs of the cadets, yet the atmosphere seemed to revolve around the veteran, each shadow and beam of sunlight accentuating his quiet dominance. Frank's hand lingered for a moment on the leather strap of his satchel, a subtle motion that suggested readiness, experience, and meticulous care. The cadet's attention fixated, the faint metallic glint of the metal drawing their eyes repeatedly. Memories surfaced as though in rhythm with the gentle sway of his movement. Early mornings in distant deserts, the careful coordination of teams, silent signals exchanged between soldiers, steps in unison across challenging terrain, each choice made with precision and calm deliberation. The cadets felt the influence of those unseen experiences pressing against the certainty of their youth, an invisible yet undeniable shift in authority that reshaped the energy in the yard. Frank's eyes met Connor's and Liam's, steady and unwavering, not as a challenge, but as a conduit of understanding, demonstrating that mastery was quiet, observant, and deliberate, not loud or forceful. Ethan Ross, internalizing every nuance, could feel the shift in confidence among his peers, the subtle recognition that the lesson was imparted not by words or demonstrations, but through the invisible language of presence and experience. The distant flutter of the American flag, the soft hum of base operations, the occasional creak of bleacher supports, all receded into background noise, leaving the cadets focused entirely on the veteran's measured movements, deliberate breathing, and the weight of history embedded in every line of his posture. Each small gesture, each moment of stillness, conveyed a layered depth of experience, a lifetime of discipline, and a precision that spoke louder than any spoken command could. Connor's fingers flexed slightly, Liam adjusted his stance subtly, the cadets' understanding growing in waves as they witnessed the quiet authority of a man who had seen and managed far more than they could imagine, the intensity of observation and the calculated restraint leaving a lasting impression. Frank's exhalation was slow, controlled, deliberate, and in its simplicity carried a profound gravity, signaling that the space, the moment, and the attention of all present were acknowledged, respected, and measured. The sun continued to climb, the yard glowing and warm beneath it, yet the cadets remained anchored by the presence of Frank Thompson, absorbing the silent lesson that respect was cultivated through mastery, patience, and enduring consistency, a weight that needed no words, only the observance of a lifetime's worth of expertise, subtly demonstrated, deeply understood, and quietly acknowledged. The afternoon sun cast long, golden beams across the training yard, illuminating the subtle dust particles dancing in the air and highlighting the determined faces of the cadets, yet their focus remained entirely on Frank Thompson, whose presence alone seemed to anchor the space in a precise, unspoken authority. Each step he took was deliberate, measured, a rhythm that communicated both experience and calm control, and the faint rustle of his jacket was like a signal that carried decades of unspoken lessons in every movement. Connor Blake and Liam Harris shifted slightly, rifles now lowered completely, the initial tension in their shoulders softening as recognition settled into their expressions, the earlier bravado replaced by a quiet, reflective awareness of the depth standing before them. Ethan Ross remained in his position, just behind, observing closely, noting the small, deliberate motions, the subtle way Frank adjusted his weight, and the gentle but unwavering focus in his pale blue eyes, all of which combined to convey a mastery born of years and conditions far beyond this sunlit yard. The distant hum of activity at the base became a faint backdrop as the cadets absorbed the silent teaching unfolding. Every glance, every subtle hand movement, every slight tilt of the head spoke of strategic thinking and calm judgment, of a lifetime spent refining both skill and restraint. Frank's hand moved again, briefly touching the metal on his chest, the tarnished surface catching the sunlight and reflecting a legacy of quiet achievement and meticulous care, and in that fleeting glimmer, the cadets saw not only recognition of past deeds, but a demonstration of values far greater than themselves. The wind lifted, carrying the faint scent of dust and warmth across the yard, yet Frank remained steady, unshaken, his stance composed, and his eyes never leaving the cadets, silently conveying that awareness, patience, and precision were the most powerful tools one could wield. Each cadet felt the weight of that realization, the subtle influence of Frank's presence reshaping their perception of authority and respect, not through words, but through the unbroken demonstration of control, clarity, and mastery. The shadows cast by the bleachers lengthened and shifted with the sun, and each movement of Frank's hands or feet seemed to command a quiet attention, a respect drawn not from fear or discipline, but from the undeniable resonance of lived experience. Ethan Ross's chest rose and fell in rhythm with the unspoken lesson, the awareness settling into his mind that true authority did not need to be declared or demonstrated through force. It existed inherently in the measured actions and calm observation of a person who had lived and mastered far more than could ever be conveyed in a classroom or drill exercise. Connor and Liam's expressions softened further, their earlier agitation replaced by a cautious curiosity and growing reverence, the realization dawning that the value of expertise and judgment was far deeper than mere physical ability or youthful confidence. The sunlight continued to brighten the yard, highlighting the metal, the subtle folds of Frank's jacket, the deliberate movements of his hands, and the gentle sway of the straps of his satchel, each element reinforcing the impression of experience and enduring capability. The cadets remained attentive, every sense tuned to the veteran's presence, every motion, every quiet gesture, embedding in their awareness the full weight of the silent lesson, the lesson of patience, observation, and the quiet assertion of earned respect. Even as the wind shifted and stirred the papers and dust around their feet, the cadets stood fixed, absorbing the impact of the veteran's composure and the power of a legacy lived fully, silently understanding that the most formidable presence was not the loudest or the fastest, but the one defined by history, mastery, and the quiet authority of a life dedicated to service, skill, and unwavering attention to detail, leaving an impression that would resonate long after the sun had begun its descent and the yard returned to the ordinary rhythm of training exercises. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a warm, golden hue across the concrete of the training yard, yet the intensity of the lesson remained undiminished, the space still suspended in a quiet tension that stretched with every measured movement Frank Thompson made. His gaze swept across the cadets once more, noting the subtle changes in posture, the slight lowering of shoulders, the careful positioning of feet as Connor Blake and Liam Harris adjusted to the weight of understanding now pressing upon them. Ethan Ross, still a step back, observed the faintest flicker of a smile in Frank's eyes, almost imperceptible, yet it carried reassurance, an acknowledgement of recognition that the lesson had been absorbed, at least in part, without a word spoken. The veteran's hand moved to the strap of his satchel again, adjusting it slowly, deliberately, a gesture that held decades of habit and training, each small motion a communication of calm control and experienced judgment. The cadets' breaths were synchronized now, each inhale and exhale slower, deeper, measured, as if the very rhythm of the veteran's presence had drawn them into an unspoken cadence of respect and attentiveness. The distant hum of the bass faded further, replaced by the subtle sound of wind shifting through loose papers and the faint rustle of uniforms, creating an ambient backdrop that emphasized the stark contrast between youthful urgency and seasoned composure. Frank's eyes lingered on the metal, catching a glint of late afternoon light, and the cadets felt the resonance of its history, the weight of countless missions, the care of meticulous preparation, and the integrity of a life lived in disciplined service, all communicated silently, yet unmistakably, through posture, gesture, and gaze. The shadows lengthened across the yard, stretching the space and adding depth to the scene, each beam of light carving lines that accentuated the veteran's presence, the folds of his jacket, the creases in his face, and the deliberate calm of his movements. Connor and Liam shifted again, subtly, their previous arrogance now tempered by the awareness of a mastery and experience far beyond their comprehension, each cadet recognizing in the stillness and control of Frank Thompson a living testament to the power of patience, precision, and restraint. Ethan Ross felt a tightening in his chest, a mixture of awe and attentiveness, understanding that the true lesson was not in instruction or demonstration, but in observation, absorbing the quiet, unwavering authority of a veteran whose life had cultivated judgment, awareness, and the strength to command without raising a voice. The veteran's subtle motions, adjusting his jacket, tilting his head slightly, letting his gaze pass over the cadets with calm scrutiny, spoke volumes, and the cadets absorbed each nuance, their awareness sharpening, their understanding deepening, a silent recognition of the weight carried by experience, history, and measured action. Frank's presence filled the space entirely. The energy he emitted subtle yet powerful, demanding recognition, attention, and respect without any declaration, and the cadets, despite their youth, felt the gravity of it, each heartbeat, each inhalation attuned to the silent rhythm established by a life of mastery. The afternoon heat, the shifting shadows, the faint sounds of the bass, all became secondary to the clarity and focus emanating from Frank. Each detail of his posture, every careful motion, every small glance reinforcing the depth and precision of his authority. The cadet's expressions softened further, eyes wide, lips pressed lightly together in concentration, absorbing the lesson as a whole, a totality of experience, calm control, and unspoken instruction, understanding that the most profound authority was quiet, deliberate, and earned over a lifetime, leaving an imprint on the observers that would linger far beyond the final rays of sunlight fading from the training yard. The light in the training yard softened as the sun began its gradual descent, casting long, warm shadows across the concrete and illuminating the subtle dust particles suspended in the air, creating an almost tangible atmosphere that seemed to frame Frank Thompson in a halo of quiet authority. He took a deliberate step forward, the worn leather of his satchel creaking softly with the motion, and the cadets, Connor Blake and Liam Harris, instinctively shifted, their rifles lowered entirely, the earlier tension now replaced by a careful attentiveness that made their movements almost synchronized without conscious effort. Frank's eyes scanned the yard with methodical precision, noting the cadence of each breath, the micro-adjustments of weight and boots, the slight tightening of fingers along the rifles, every detail observed, cataloged, and appreciated with a depth only decades of disciplined experience could provide. Ethan Ross, a few paces back, felt a knot of realization tighten in his chest, recognizing the depth of observation and unspoken communication at play, the veteran teaching through presence rather than instruction, imparting lessons with the subtlety and weight of one who had navigated far more complex challenges than the young cadets could imagine. The metal on Frank's jacket caught a fleeting ray of sunlight, the faint glint drawing attention to its worn surface, edges dulled by age and service, yet resonating with a history that spoke louder than words. Each small gesture, a tilt of the head, a shift of weight, a gentle adjustment of the jacket, was magnified in the cadet's awareness, communicating mastery, patience, and careful deliberation. The distant hum of bass activity and the occasional flutter of flags in the wind receded into background noise as the focus of all attention tightened around the veteran, the cadets absorbing not only his presence but the weight of his history, the accumulation of a lifetime spent refining skills, judgment, and understanding. Frank's gaze lingered on Connor and Liam, steady and unwavering, conveying awareness, authority, and patience without uttering a single word, the silent lesson pressing on them like the heat of the sun on the concrete beneath their boots. The subtle rustle of uniform fabric and shifting of leather straps became the only audible markers of movement, amplifying the cadets' acute awareness of their own breathing, posture, and presence in the space, a mirror to the veteran's deliberate composure. Ethan Ross's chest rose and fell in measured rhythm with the unfolding moment, understanding that authority was not claimed by volume or dominance, but by observation, precision, and the quiet power of experience communicated without words. The shadows elongated further as the sun dipped lower, bathing the yard. In a soft amber glow, each movement, each slight exhale, each nuanced gesture of Frank Thompson etched into the cadet's perception with enduring clarity. Connor and Liam's expressions softened entirely, awe and respect replacing the remnants of youthful arrogance, their focus entirely absorbed by the veteran's deliberate, calm presence, understanding through observation the subtleties of discipline, mastery, and restraint. The gentle lift of Frank's hand to adjust the strap of his satchel, the faint glint of the metal in sunlight, the controlled cadence of his breathing, all combined to reinforce the lesson of composed authority, an unspoken assertion of earned respect. The wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of dry earth and sun-warmed concrete. Yet the cadets remained anchored in place, their attention riveted to the veteran's every motion, every deliberate pause, every measured glance. In that quiet, suspended moment, the full weight of the veteran's life and experience was communicated, and the cadets, absorbing the lesson silently and completely, understood that true mastery, authority, and respect were embodied in presence, subtlety, and unwavering composure, leaving an imprint on their perception that would endure far beyond the fading sunlight and the ordinary rhythms of the training yard. The sun had sunk lower now, casting long, amber shadows across the yard and bathing the concrete in a soft, almost reverent glow, as if the space itself recognized the culmination of the lesson unfolding. Frank Thompson moved with a deliberate ease, the careful rhythm of his steps, the gentle shift of weight from one foot to the other, and the measured tilt of his head communicating a mastery that required no words, no demonstration, only presence and awareness. The cadets, Connor Blake and Liam Harris, remained still, their expressions a mixture of awe, respect, and deep realization, rifles fully lowered, eyes fixed on the veteran as they absorbed the full breadth of his silent authority. Ethan Ross, standing a few paces back, felt the gravity of decades of experience pressing into the moment, understanding that every small motion, the adjustment of a jacket strap, the subtle glint of the metal, the deliberate focus in Frank's pale blue eyes, was a lesson etched in patience, discipline, and unwavering composure. The distant sounds of the bass faded completely, leaving only the soft whisper of wind across concrete, the faint flutter of loose papers, and the quiet, unspoken communication that flowed between observer and observed. Frank paused briefly, scanning the yard one last time, the sunlight glinting off the worn surfaces of his satchel and metal, a subtle reminder of a life devoted to mastery, careful judgment, and consistent, measured action. The cadets shifted slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the weight they felt, the depth of understanding growing in them as they realized that authority and respect were not claimed by words or enforced through commands, but embodied in a lifetime of deliberate choices, calm judgment, and composed presence. The shadows of the bleachers stretched longer, reaching toward the veteran as if drawn by the quiet significance of his experience, and each subtle gesture, each controlled breath, each deliberate glance reinforced the lesson that true mastery required no exhibition, no demonstration beyond the precise, steady actions of a seasoned life. Connor and Liam exchanged brief, silent glances, their earlier certainty replaced by a contemplative awareness that the veteran's presence alone carried lessons no drill, no lecture, and no spoken instruction could ever match. Ethan Ross, internalizing every nuance, understood that the rhythm of observation, the careful measurement of action, and the consistent restraint displayed by Frank were themselves the most powerful instruments of instruction, their impact resonating far beyond the fleeting minutes of the afternoon. The gentle rise and fall of the veteran's chest, the careful placement of each foot, the subtle adjustment of his jacket, and the calm, unwavering intensity in his gaze all communicated an enduring authority, a weight of experience, and a silent insistence on respect that penetrated the awareness of every cadet in the yard. The warmth of the setting sun highlighted the edges of the metal, the folds of the jacket, and the subtle movements of Frank's hands, reinforcing the presence of a legacy that was quietly, yet powerfully, asserted. Each cadet's posture reflected a newfound attentiveness, their minds absorbing the lesson that mastery, patience, and authority were inseparable, that the calm, deliberate actions of a life well lived could command recognition more profoundly than any words, any shout, or any demonstration. The shadows lengthened further as the sun approached the horizon, the yard now bathed in a soft, contemplative light, and Frank Thompson, with measured steps and composed presence, began to move toward the edge of the space, leaving the cadets suspended in the quiet imprint of the lesson, the weight of his life and experience lingering in the air, a profound, inescapable understanding of respect, discipline, and the enduring power of quiet mastery that would remain with them long after the sun had disappeared and the ordinary rhythm of the bass resumed its pace.